I'm going to hit the record button, so we're recording. Let me pray for us, Father. Father, I just thank you so much for all that you've done for us. Thank you for your son, Jesus, Lord. And I just thank you that we are brothers and sisters because of what he did on the cross, Lord. And so, Father, I pray for Marinie's grandma that you just keep her strong. And I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to sell this house quickly. And I pray you'd help Guy with just resisting sugar. I know how well how big that temptation can be, Father. Help us tonight as we work through this lesson in Christ's name. Amen. Last week was a train wreck for me, personally and professionally in a couple different ways. We had someone pass away in the church. That's always, a little bit of a demand on my time and energy. And then I got sick for like a day and a half. So sick that I wasn't sure that I would make the funeral. So I did make the funeral. I was, I kind of crashed before, and then I went home and crashed afterwards. So it was difficult. But recovered. And this sermon, I wrote this starting on Saturday evening. So usually I like to have things kind of ironed out, all my reading done, all my thinking thought, by about Friday morning, Saturday mornings. Well, Saturday morning is usually when I'm thinking, okay, let's practice this. So this was hastily put together, more hastily than I usually like to see. So as I started thinking about this idea, and what we're talking about is how the ancient word speaks to the modern world. And God wrote the Bible in a number of different ways. He used it by using people. And so the way that this works is that the Holy Spirit would speak through the person who is writing or speaking the biblical story in a way that the exact word that God wants used comes through in the prophet or teacher's own voice. And so every person who is involved in writing the Bible, those people were moved by God, but you can see their individual styles. And there are a number of different ways that we use to communicate in ordinary human language. One of them is when we tell a story. And when you think about it, when a child tells a story, now I have a 5-year-old grandson, and my grandson loves to tell stories, but he doesn't know how. He doesn't know about, the characters in a story and how some characters are central to the story. He doesn't know about how there's a beginning and an end and a climax and a point. He doesn't know any of that. And so stories are familiar to us. They use things like once upon a time. Dude, you won't believe what just happened. So those are introductions or ways that we begin a story. We end the story with, and then he died from a man cold. They lived happily ever after, though. Those kinds of things conclude the stories. Along the way, there are elements that are literary devices. Sometimes when we want to communicate kind of a down mood, we'll start with something like it's a dark and stormy night. This guy is a flat character. He's just there to move the story along. Some people are round characters. They're central characters, people we emote with, and we sort of feel their feelings because of the way the author is presenting them. Stories lead to conclusions, and in the Bible, these are theological conclusions. And the details often make a big difference in the story. The Bible uses narrative to communicate theology in a memorable way that even children can understand. We spoke recently about the idea of covenant. And the idea of covenant is that there is a relationship that comes before the legal requirements of the relationship. And so the people of Israel have entered into a covenant relationship with their God. And so they've agreed, we're going to have this relationship. And can God set the stipulations or the requirements of a relationship? Well, yeah, he's God. And if you're going to enter into that relationship, you're agreeing to abide by those rules. One of the things that I found out when I married my wife is that she had certain requirements of me that she did not write down beforehand. It's my job to take out the trash. I had to discover this, by painful experience and argumentation. Much easier in a covenant relationship. And so the basis of law is a covenant relationship. It's carefully defined between two parties. Have you ever thought about what about people who are born outside that covenant relationship, outside the people of Israel? There were ways to get in, but it really wasn't very easy. Inside that covenant relationship, the agreement to for Israel to be the people of God and for God to be their God, there are always several possible responses. One is indifference. Some people just don't care. Oh yeah, we're the people of God. Whoopee. Some people would obey out of ritual. A person who's indifferent would obey to keep out of trouble. I just don't want to get any trouble, so here's my sacrifice. I don't want to get in any trouble, so I'll go 59 miles an hour rather than drive 55. So some people are kind of indifferent. Some people follow the law out of ritual or habit, but some people truly understand and truly get that the covenant relationship with God is special. And so inside the covenant, there are a number of different ways to obey God, or a number of different attitudes that you would carry around with you. When we think about the history of ancient Israel, um, they're led out of Egypt by Moses in an event called the Exodus. This is about 1,500 years before the time of Christ. Wait a minute, let me think. Moses wrote this down about 14, yeah, I think that's about right. 1,500 years-ish before the time of Christ. They spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness before entering into the promised land. Right before they entered the promised land, the nation of Israel reaffirmed the covenant, promising to obey the law. And there were blessings that were set for obedience. If they were obedient to the law, God promised them certain things. Deuteronomy 28:1 says this: if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on the earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. So basically, Moses is setting out, if you are obedient to the covenant, to the laws that govern the covenant relationship, then God will provide certain things for you. And one of the provisions, just a couple verses down, your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed. Okay, what does that mean? It means that you'll have wheat in your basket and food in the trough. You'll be able to make the things that you want to eat, like bread. One of the promises for obedience is that they would avoid famine. An obedient nation would always have something to eat. So we go from Moses, we go to Joshua. Joshua is the book of the Bible that comes after the first five. So Moses is the guy who leads them up to the promised land, and then Joshua takes over and leads them into the promised land, where there are signs that the people didn't obey as fully as they were supposed to. So even though they're agreeing to follow after God, agreeing to do the law, they end up not doing it as well as they should. And then you get to the book of Judges, when the nation of Israel was ruled by judges, obviously. And in the book of Judges, it says this. This is chapter 17, verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Okay, think about that for a second. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. So I don't know about you, but what's right in my eyes and what's right in somebody else's eyes are going to be completely different things. And so you would have a whole bunch of different moral standards competing for dominance in a culture like that. That's kind of a scary thing, isn't it? And that kind of is the world we live in today. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. There are some dark things in the book of Judges. Following your own desires leads to pain and suffering. With no king to lead them, the people of Israel are really kind of all over the place, wandering like a child, telling a story. The book of Ruth is where we're going to kind of land today. And the book of Ruth is a narrative, a story describing real events in a Jewish family during the time of the judges. While everyone is doing right in their own eyes, surely there must be some people who are faithful to their covenant relationship with God. And really, this is a great story. I'm going to touch on a couple different points, but really reading Ruth is worth your time. It's not very long. It's only 4 chapters. One of the things that really stands out is Ruth's commitment to the covenant God. And each one of these details is going to set sort of a dark and stormy night kind of a vibe here. So let me get those switched up and take you to the book of Ruth. Chapter 1. Okay, so right off the bat, in the days when the judges ruled, that sort of draws the curtain down a little bit. The house lights are fading and closing in. There was a famine in the land. There's not supposed to be a famine in the land of Israel, not if they're being obedient to God's law. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, Bethlehem means house of bread, with his wife and 2 sons went to live for a while in the country of Moab. Is that a friendly place or an unfriendly place? It's not friendly. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Kilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women. Are Israelites supposed to do that? One named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Kilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Okay, so as we enter as we enter the book of Ruth, this isn't quite the happy story that we're hoping for. We like happy stories. This was a dark and stormy night. This kind of dims the lights, and we're thinking, oh man, what are these people doing? What are they thinking about here? I'll switch back over to the PowerPoint here. It was a dark and stormy night. The judges ruled. There was famine in the land. Moab is the country that tried to curse the people of Israel when they were on their way into the promised land. They have history. It's not very friendly. The Moabites were pagans. They worship pagan idols. There's a literary type scene where a literary type scene is when you see a certain element in a story, or certain elements rather, it leads to a certain expectation. One of them is a woman at a well. When a man meets a woman at a well, you anticipate a wedding. Okay, that's kind of a type scene that goes back to Genesis. When we see that happen with Jesus in John 3, it breaks the type scene. There's a woman at the well, but she's been married 5 times, so we don't get a wedding. So there are type scenes, there are broken type scenes. There's also the scene where during a famine, famous people leave the land of promise and go into foreign countries. Abram does it with his wife Sarai. They become Abraham and Sarah. Abram and Sarai go down to Egypt, where Abraham tells everybody that his wife is his sister. And that doesn't end well. Actually, it sort of ends well. His wife gets taken into Pharaoh's harem, and then before the marriage is consummated, he finds out that she's married. And so it's an ironic switch because the Pharaoh is more concerned with being righteous than the righteous man of God, Abram. So just crazy stuff in the Bible. Abraham's son, Isaac, faces a famine, goes into the land of, they're the A people, something A. I'll say Ammonites, but I'm not exactly sure. There's Ammonites, Amalekites, Ashdodites. There's like all kinds of A names. Yeah, gosh. Anyway, it's going to bother me. So they go into this foreign land, Isaac and his wife, Rebecca, and he tells people that she's his sister, and it doesn't go well. So here you have this guy who, there's a famine, and he leaves the land. Don't leave the land unless God tells you to. So and then all the men die. The sons' names probably symbolically mean sickness and destruction. So all the men die. The opening of Ruth is dark and foreboding. And think about this. what status, like, where is Naomi? Like, as far as her status is concerned, she's a refugee in a foreign land with no property. And so it's time to go home. She's ashamed and impoverished. Naomi tries to convince her daughters-in-law to return to their mother's homes and remarry within their religious and cultural systems. I'm sorry. Yeah, Naomi's a broken woman. The law of Moses provided a way for a widow to bear offspring and achieve security in the ancient family system through something called levirate marriage. This is where a brother would take the widow of his brother's widow as a wife and father offspring for his brother, because the only social security that you had in the ancient world was that your children were there to take care of you. And so having children in the ancient world was like a real big deal. It was a real cultural imperative. And so Naomi is out of sons. She doesn't have any other sons that she can marry off to Orpah and Ruth. And even if she were to marry and get pregnant, she'd have, 20 years, 30 years difference between these kids, so there wouldn't be any option for any of them. She's broke, completely broke. In this, the levirate marriage was intended to prevent your lineage from dying out. And so Naomi's lineage, or really Elimelech's lineage, is going to die out. She has no options. She has no alternative that she can see. Ruth is young, but we look at Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her loyalty to God as sort of the central what would you call it? The central theme of the story. Let's take a look at Ruth's promise to Naomi. So I've summarized what's going on. Let me give you this. So Naomi tells the girls, go back to your families, go back to your gods. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. That's an incredible testimony, because Ruth basically is agreeing to be really agreeing to be a slave of a woman who has nothing. And so in this situation, Naomi should be providing for Ruth, and Ruth says, look, you don't have anything, but I'll just come back with you anyway, because it's better to be a slave in a land where the one true God is worshiped than to be a king where there's no worship of the one true God. And so when Ruth and Naomi re-enter Bethlehem at the end of chapter 1, the women of the city come out and they recognize Naomi. And Naomi says, look, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, or bitterness. And so narratives invite us to identify with the characters. Who do you think, now I've sort of given you some brief descriptions here, who are you supposed to identify with? And maybe who do you identify with? Some people would identify with Naomi, when life has kicked you in the face, and you're broken. There are people in the Bible who have been there before, and we can learn from their circumstances. We can resonate with the roundness of their character. Ruth is a foreigner who is willing to take these incredible risks and go with Naomi. I think Ruth is the character that God wants us to identify with. And it's ironic because Ruth is from Moab. She's from a place where they don't worship the one true God. She's desperate to get to Israel, where they do worship the one true God. And in Israel, where they have all the blessings of the covenant, everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes. So it's this incredible reversal of fortunes. It's this incredible character in this woman, Ruth. A foreigner who accepts slavery to a woman of no status for the sake of the relationship she'll gain with the one true God. Is God enough when you have nothing? Sometimes it's easier to have nothing because then you don't have anything but God. Is God enough when you have a lot? That's sometimes harder because when you have a lot, you also have a lot to lose. Ruth's mind is set on obedience to the God of Israel and advocacy for her mother-in-law. What does that attitude look like for you and for me? Are we willing to take risks with for the sake of our relationship with God and the life and health of the church? Sorry. And so the second point is that Boaz is going to come on the scene, and Boaz is going to honor Ruth's commitment. Okay, something just flashed at me. Chat box. Yeah, guy just brought up the Roman centurion. He's another character we're supposed to kind of emulate because he had in the Gospels, the Roman centurion had um, great faith in God. Boaz is the guy who is a relative of Naomi's deceased husband. A lot of this is from chapter 2, and I'm just going to read a couple things. Like I said, I'd encourage you to go back and read it. So Ruth has gone out and she started to, Ruth and Naomi are back in Bethlehem. They're looking for work. They're looking for food. And one of the ways you would do this in the ancient world is you would go out and glean in the fields. The fields are, grains would grow up, and then when they were ready for harvest, the workers would come through with a big scythe and they would cut the stalks of grain, and they would stack them into sheaves. So you stack them up, and then somebody comes and throws them on a wagon. And every time that grain is moved, a few kernels will shake loose and drop on the ground. And so gleaning is where you come through, and just like these women are doing, you see the one on the left, she's got something around her waist where she's just picking up kernels, little kernels of wheat. Can you imagine how much backbreaking labor there would be in this? And so Ruth has gone out to glean the fields after they're harvested. The very poor come out to do this. They pick up the stray kernels. Harvest is a lot of work. Everybody's involved. But harvest is also a very joyful time because you can imagine getting fresh bread at the end of a long winter. And so Boaz is the property owner. He's kind of the man behind the scenes. He's not out there doing the labor. He comes out to see what's going on. And here in this painting, you can see the guys in the background holding the equipment, moving the sheaves. This is probably a Renaissance painting, which doesn't always interpret the biblical world very well. So Boaz comes out to supervise, and he notices Ruth, and he asks, whose young woman is this? Now, in the ancient world, it's an interesting question because he doesn't ask, who is this person? He's asking, who does this person belong to? How is she connected in the larger social networks of our town? And so when he realizes that she is Naomi's daughter-in-law, he acts to protect her because he recognizes that he is connected to Naomi. Naomi is connected to this girl, and that creates a social obligation of protection over Ruth. And so he warns his guys. He's like, hey guys, leave her alone. Don't flirt with her. Don't mess with her. None of that stuff. Give her a little bit more, throw some grain at her when she's, when she's gleaning close to you, let her have a little extra, let her work closer to the easier places where it is to glean. And Ruth asks why he has shown her this favor. And so in Ruth chapter 2, verse 11, Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord God repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Ruth responds, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not even have the standing of one of your servants. So this is Sorry, I get excited. This is such a great story. In this time and culture, what these women need were not kind words and blessings, but were for someone to take responsibility to continue Elimelech and Naomi's family line. They just can't or won't see a way through to do it. So, what Ruth needs really is a husband. And so how can this foreigner in a land of Israel where they're supposed to stay intermarried to maintain property ownership, how can she marry into this culture? She's pledged her life to Naomi. And here you have Boaz saying, "Oh, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord." Hey, Boaz, step up, dude. How are you going to make this happen? Ruth reports all this to Naomi. In chapter 2, verse 19, her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today?" "Where did you work?" "Well, blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Now, the idea of a guardian redeemer, this is a relative who is close enough to have a social obligation to raise up children for a deceased relative. These, when you, okay, so like I'm responsible for my children while they're underage. How am I responsible for guys' children? Well, sure. If I could find a way to help one of them, I would help one of them. I'd have that responsibility. If God forbid something happened to Guy and Stephanie and they had left in their will that we had to take care of, Haley, we'd do what we could from Michigan. Maybe send her a $20 bill every week or so while she took care of Granny. Sorry, that's just family joking around. In this case, so Boaz would be the guy who Naomi's husband has died. Naomi's husband has died. Boaz is the guy who should enter in with Naomi and maybe raise up children with her, but Naomi's too old to have children. So what's he supposed to do? There's probably enough ambiguity here where is Boaz obligated to marry Ruth and raise up children for her dead husband? The penalty for refusing to raise up a child of the deceased is a social shaming, where the widow is allowed to take your shoe and spit in your face. But that kind of involves some awkward penalties anyway. Naomi has her husband's property, which will pass to someone in the family if it remains unredeemed. The right of redemption would involve levirate marriage to raise up a male heir to own the property. Either way, you would gain an obligation without a benefit. Well, let me just back up on that for a second, okay? In a levirate marriage, okay, the guardian redeemer relative, okay, you have the guy who's died. He doesn't have any children, so you need to raise up children for him. So this guy, the guardian redeemer, has to get married to a woman, raise up a child who will then inherit the land, and then what does he get out of the deal? He gets to take care of the women, and this guy gets all the stuff. That's not a good investment. So in this setting in Ruth, you have a bunch of guys thinking, okay, when Naomi dies, somebody's going to have to get the land title. It stays in the family. So sorry, Naomi, we're going to let Elimelech's line just kind of die out. Sorry, I got to. And so there's an obligation here. The New International, the NIV, the New International Version application commentary on Ruth says this: women view levirate unions as opportunities to ensure family continuity and promise widows with security. Men, in contrast, see levirate unions as a threat to their understanding of paternity and their desire to protect their own interests. I would rather my brothers take good care of themselves than have to take a second wife as any of my sisters-in-law. Although I love them all dearly, that's just not going to happen. So glad that that doesn't work anymore. Boaz is a good guy. He's probably closer to Naomi's generation than Ruth's, and he is acting to care for his relatives, but he's not willing to provide a solution for their problem. He's a little hesitant. He's even passive. And so the ladies are going to have to take care of themselves. Narratives invite us to identify with the characters. Are you Boaz? Powerful, but passive. Are you Ruth? Really diligent, hardworking, and willing to take a risk to take care of your family? How big a risk will you take to take care of your family? Your life is a story that you play a key part in writing. To be sure, God is always at work behind the scenes, sometimes in the scenes. But how much initiative does God expect of you? What if it's a lot? Ruth, if the book of Ruth is any indication of what God wants from his people, it's bold action for the sake of their relationship to him. It's bold action for the life and health of the church. As Christians, to be dedicated to God in a world where everyone does what is right in their own eyes. The climax of Ruth's story is in chapter 3, where she risks everything to provide for her family. Sorry. Ruth risks everything for the covenant. So it's barley harvest season, and it's the end of harvest season, and it's a good time to celebrate. Oh, hang on, I gotta wait. Now it's let's look at the text of Ruth chapter 3. We'll look at verses 1 through 13. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." Well, now here's the question. What does it mean to uncover somebody's feet? You ever think about that? And think about it. The Bible, Ruth actually happens to be King David's great grandmother. So you have to be careful and respectful of the great king's great grandmother. And so it's the end of the harvest season. It's time to celebrate. Is uncover his feet a nice way of saying that Ruth and Boaz had an intimate moment? Well, it's possible, and you can believe either way. because the scriptures are not perfectly clear in this respect. What we can notice is that Boaz is awakened by a young woman at night, and he doesn't mind. So what does that tell you? Even though Boaz is a good guy, he's passive. He's not going to come up with a solution for Naomi. Ruth and Naomi have to do that. And it's interesting to note Ruth's boldness and how her boldness is related to Boaz's prayer. Boaz says, "May the Lord spread his wing over you." Ruth wakes him up at night and then says, "Spread your garment over me." So it's a very similar kind of an idea. Spread your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. This is a marriage proposal. That's what she's suggesting. She says, you spread the garment over this part of the family. Take responsibility for us. And she's the one who's driving the bus. In chapter 4, Boaz works out the details with the more closely related Redeemer, noting that the Redeemer would not inherit the land directly, but would have to produce a male heir through Ruth. So he would get the obligation for the land and the care of the women, but not the outright free and clear ownership of the property. Ruth chapter 4 verse 5 says this, Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." So basically, Boaz puts it in a legal environment. Hey, here's what we're doing. We're providing an heir to own that property, and we're going to do it through this young Moabite woman. So whoever the other redeemer is, he's like, I'm out. No, that's too much obligation. With the other redeemer's public refusal to buy Naomi's property, Boaz makes the arrangement and plans the wedding. Ruth takes this bold action. She takes a big risk, and it pays off. So Boaz took Ruth in Ruth chapter 4, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now here's how it works out legally, because a Moabite cannot be a member of the community of Israel to the 10th generation. But Obed is not Ruth's legal son. Remember, we're dealing with a levirate situation where you're raising up an heir Well, there you go. Still kind of a mess. And so the child was produced by Ruth and Boaz. Excuse me. But the child legally belongs to Naomi and is thus a member of the community of Israel and the ancestor of a king. If Ruth waited at home for Boaz to call, she would have died an old maid. Boaz was a good guy. But in the story, he's very passive. He doesn't take action. Ruth is the one who is the hero. She takes action in the story, and she ends up being the great-grandmother of the greatest king in Israel. How many of us are waiting for God when he's waiting on us? I have a good friend who says we should do everything short of sin to spread the message about Jesus. That's a lot. Are we doing it? If I die tonight, know that I love you all. Let's not be Boaz. Let's not be nice and honorable but passive. Let's be like Ruth. Let's be bold. Let's be daring even. What do we have to lose? The book of Ruth is a story about David's great-grandmother who risks everything to be grafted into the people of God. The narrative starts with a dark scene where there isn't much trust in God. And it uses the story of David's great-grandmother, ironically, to point out that a Moabite woman gives up everything to become a part of Israel. Her attitude is one of absolute trust in God, and advocacy for her family, Naomi's family. She's willing to take great risks to enter into the people of Israel. She's a very worthy great-grandmother to a great king. You know, God is a master storyteller who weaves an intricate, detailed narrative that gives us God is a master storyteller. Yes, you might have to take care of my kids. I'm on grandkids now. He weaves these details together to teach us a story. You live in a dark time too. Everyone does what is right in his own eyes in modern America. And God still rewards his people, no matter what their status or lack of status, who risk great things for their relationship with him. When you tell your story, is your relationship to God with a central theme, or is it like a minor detail? And then I went to church. Oh, and then the mailman drove by. I haven't taken time to read you all the book of Ruth. Make sure you read it all for yourself. Narratives in the Bible are meant to be read and enjoyed while you learn from them. To chop them up into verses loses the flow of the story. Take the time to notice the characters and see whom you identify with. Ask questions about the details, and the more questions you ask and then find the answers for, the more you'll learn from the Bible. Ask yourself if you're willing to do anything short of sin to advance the message about Jesus into the world around you. And if the answer there is no, you might be Boaz. Great guy, just a little passive. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just turn my microphone off. You guys can... Thanks for coming out.
You're live?
Mostly. Going to go with mostly.
Mostly. Well, I hope you feel better. I'm sure I've Ruth before, and I'm sure I've heard lessons on it before, quite as detailed as that. I know you felt like you could have done better, but I think not being sick could have helped some too, but it's fine. You'll do better. Yeah, just a little bit. I will continue to pray for the sale of your house. Well, specifically the sale of the house you're not living in.
Yes. I got a good deal on this one. If I can get a great sale on that one, then we'll be in a good spot. So great to have you all come out. That 515 number, is that Marini? Did you guys call in?
Yeah, we had to call in. We lost the internet.
Oh, man. What's up with that? Did you water it?
Right? I think God is trying to tell me a message. So I was literally on the edge of my seat to find out what happened with Ruth, and then the internet cut out. And so God's telling me, now you really must go read Ruth. Fine, I get it. I'll go read it.
All right, I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
All right, good night, guys.
All right, good night. God bless you.
Bless.